CDL Practice Test, Texas, Air Brake, Part 2. Question number 27. If the low pressure warning light comes on while you are driving, A. You can brake 14 times before the air in the system runs out. B. You should continue to drive normally and check the brake system when it is convenient. C. You should continue driving, but turn the emergency flashes on to warn other motorists. D. Braking will only occur if there is enough air in the tanks. The correct answer is here, D. Braking will only occur if there is enough air in the tanks. Explanation. If the low air pressure warning light turns on, you should stop and safely park your vehicle as soon as possible. Controlled braking will be possible only as long as enough air remains in the tanks. Question number 28. If you're driving a vehicle with a front brake limiting valve, you should A. Set it to slippery if you are driving on ice. B. Always keep it on the slippery setting. C. Always keep it on the normal setting. The correct answer is here, C. Always keep it on the normal setting. Explanation. Some older vehicles have a manually controlled front brake limiting valve to reduce air pressure to the front brakes when traveling on slippery roads. However, tests have since shown that front wheel braking is unlikely to cause a skid even on slippery roads, and reducing the air pressure reduces the vehicle's stopping power. Keep the front brake limiting valve on the normal setting at all times. Question number 29. What kind of force must emergency brakes use? A. Air pressure. B. Heavy. C. Electrical. D. Mechanical. The correct answer is here, D. Mechanical. Explanation. Because air pressure can eventually leak away, the emergency brakes in an air brake system must be held on by mechanical force. Question number 30. If the brake pads rub against the brake drums and create too much heat, A. The brakes will stick. B. The brakes will become extra sensitive. C. The air compressor will kick on to cool the brakes. D. The brakes may stop working. The correct answer is here, D. The brakes may stop working. Explanation. Brakes heat up with use. If they are overused and become too hot, expansion and chemical changes will make them less effective and eventually cause them to stop working altogether. This is known as brake fade. More. Question number 31. When you use service brakes too much, they overheat. This can cause A. Rotors to warp. B. Tread damage. C. Brake fluid leaks. D. Brake drums to expand. The correct answer is here, D. Brake drums to expand. Explanation. When you overuse your service brakes, they get overheated. This causes chemical changes in the brake lining and reduces brake friction. It might also cause your brake drums to expand, which means the brake shoes can't reach the brake drums as well. Less contact means decreased brake effectiveness. Question number 32. The air compressor governor controls A. When air is pumped into the air storage tanks. B. The air pressure applied to the brakes. C. The speed of the air compressor. The correct answers here. A. When air is pumped into the air storage tanks. Explanation. The air compressor runs at all times while the engine is running. To keep the air pressure from eventually rising too high, the air compressor governor controls when the compressed air from the air compressor should flow into the air reservoirs. When air pressure drops to a certain level, typically 100 C, the governor cuts in and routes the compressed air into the storage tanks. When air pressure rises to a certain level, typically 125 C, the governor cuts out and routes the compressed air out of the system into the atmosphere. Question number 33. In a vehicle equipped with air brakes, the brake pedal, A, is connected to the slack adjusters by a series of rods and linkages. B, controls the air pressure applied to the service brakes. C, controls the speed of the air compressor. The correct answers here. B, controls the air pressure applied to the service brakes. Explanation. The brake pedal controls the amount of air pressure applied to the service brakes. The harder the pedal is pushed, the more air pressure is applied to the brakes. Question number 34. What is the best way to test if your vehicle's spring brakes come on automatically? A, continue to step on and off the brake pedal until the manufacturer's low C specification is met for spring brakes to deploy. B, on single vehicles, continue to step on and off the brake pedal until the parking brake valve pops out. C, on tractor-trailer vehicles, continue to step on and off the brake pedal until the parking brake valve pops out. D, all of the above are correct. The correct answers here. D, all of the above are correct. Explanation. On both tractor-trailers and single vehicles, to test whether the spring brakes will come on automatically, use the same method you use for testing the low air pressure warning signal. Step on and off the brake pedal, this time until you reach an even lower C reading and the parking brake valve closes or pops out. Question number 35. During your walk-around inspection, check the brake drums to be sure that no cracks are longer than the width of the friction area. A, 1/3. B, 1/4. C, 1/2. The correct answers here. C, 1/2. Explanation. During your walk-around inspection, check the brake drums to be sure that no cracks are longer than half the width of the friction area. Question number 36. How do you use the stab braking technique during emergency braking? A, brake hard with the brake pedal and hand valve until stopped. B, brake hard with the pedal until the wheels lock. Then let off the brakes for as long as the wheels were locked. C, pump the brake pedal rapidly and lightly. D, brake hard with the pedal until the wheels lock, then let off until the wheels start rolling again. The correct answers here. D, brake hard with the pedal until the wheels lock, then let off until the wheels start rolling again. Explanation. When stab braking, apply your brakes all the way. Release brakes when wheels lock up. As soon as the wheels start rolling, apply the brakes fully again. It can take up to 1 second for the wheels to start rolling after you release the brakes. If you reapply the brakes before the wheels start rolling, the vehicle won't straighten out. Question number 37. Compressed air usually contains what substances that are harmful to the brake system? A, dust and compressor oil. B, it does not contain harmful substances. C. Water and dust. D. Water and compressor oil. The correct answer is here. D. Water and compressor oil. Explanation. Water and some compressor oil are harmful to the brake system because the water can freeze and therefore cause brake failure. Question number 38. If parking brakes are not being used when the vehicle is parked, what must be done instead? A. Use the emergency brakes. B. Leave the vehicle in gear when parked. C. Parking brakes must always be used. D. Use wheel chocks. The correct answer is here. D. Use wheel chocks. Explanation. At times the parking brakes should not be used because they are too hot or wet during freezing temperatures at this time. Wheel chocks should be used instead while the brakes cool or dry out. Question number 39. With S-cam drum brakes, when the brake chamber fills with air, air pressure pushes the push rod out, moving the and thus rotating the A. Slack adjuster, tie rod. B. Slack adjuster, brake camshaft. C. Brake camshaft, tie rod. The correct answer is here. B. Slack adjuster, brake camshaft. Explanation. To apply the S-cam drum brakes, air is let into each brake chamber. Air pressure pushes the push rod out, moving the slack adjuster, thus rotating the brake camshaft. As the S-cam on the camshaft rotates, it forces the brake shoes against the inside of the brake drum. Question number 40. Before driving a vehicle with a dual air system, the driver must allow A. The air compressor to build up a minimum of at least 100 C in the primary system. B. The air compressor to build up a minimum of at least 60 C in both the primary and secondary systems. C. Nothing. There are no special circumstances for a dual air brake system. D. The air compressor to build up a minimum of at least 100 C in both the primary and secondary systems. The correct answer is here. D. The air compressor to build up a minimum of at least 100 C in both the primary and secondary systems. Explanation. Both air brake systems must be fully functional before the driver should use the vehicle. The driver must allow both systems to have at least 100 C so that the brake systems work properly. Warning. It is possible to release the brakes when the pressure has reached 45 C. The warning light will extinguish and the buzzer will stop sounding when the pressure is above 60 C. But you should never release the brakes or drive the vehicle until the air pressure in both systems is above 100 C. Question number 41. If the spring brakes are activated, you should never A. Open the hood. B. Release air from the air storage tanks. C. Open the door to the cab. D. Push down the brake pedal. The correct answer is here. D. Push down the brake pedal. Explanation. Never apply the brake pedal if your spring brakes are activated. Brakes can be damaged if they are subject to both springs and air pressure. Question number 42. The effectiveness of the spring brakes. A. Air pressure. B. Has nothing to do with the condition of the service brake. C. Can only be tested by highly trained brake service people. D. Depends on the adjustments of the service brakes. The correct answer is here, D. Depends on the adjustments of the service brakes. Explanation. The braking power of spring brakes depends on the brakes being an adjustment. If the brakes are not adjusted properly, neither the regular brakes nor the emergency parking brakes will work right. Question number 44. Which air braking system is most commonly used in commercial vehicles? A. Wedge brakes. B. Disc brakes. C. All used about equally. D. S-cam brakes. The correct answer is here, D. S-cam brakes. Explanation. Disc brakes and wedge brakes are very uncommon in commercial vehicles. S-cam brakes are, by far, the most common type. Question number 45. When the parking brake is engaged, what does it do to the spring brakes? A. Compresses the springs. B. Increases the air pressure. C. Tightens the springs onto the outside of the brake chamber. D. Releases air pressure. The correct answer is here, D. Releases air pressure. Explanation. When the parking brake is engaged, yellow knob pulled out, M-, compressed air flows out of the spring brake. The spring expands and the brakes engage, preventing the wheels from turning. When the parking brake is released, yellow knob pushed in, M-, compressed air flows into the spring brake. The spring is compressed and the brakes release, allowing the wheels to turn. Question number 46. Which of these should not be done during the final step of the basic 7-step inspection procedure? A. Check that the spring brakes come on automatically. B. Check air compressor governor cut-in and cut-out pressures. C. Test low pressure warning signal. D. Check brake drums, or discs, linings, and hoses. The correct answer is here, D. Check brake drums, or discs, linings, and hoses. Explanation. Checking the brake drums, or discs, linings, and hoses should be done during step 5, do walk-around inspection. Question number 47. Which of the following can cause brakes to fail or fade? A. Overheating, low air pressure, and not relying on the engine braking effect. B. Not pressing the brake pedal hard enough. C. Not taking your foot off the accelerator. The correct answer is here, A. Overheating, low air pressure, and not relying on the engine braking effect. Explanation. Low air pressure causes your service brakes to fail. Using brakes that have overheated can cause damage resulting in brake failure, and having brakes gradually out of alignment can cause brake fade. Question number 48. If oil and water collects in the air tanks, what could happen to the brakes? A. The brakes could fail. B. The brakes could heat up. C. The brakes could lock up. The correct answer is here, A. The brakes could fail. Explanation. Air tanks must be drained daily to make sure there is no accumulation of water or oil that can build up and cause the brakes to fail. Question number 49. In order to perform an air brake leakage test, the vehicle must A. Moving forward. B. Have its parking brake engaged. C. Have low air pressure in its tanks. D. Not have the engine running. The correct answers here. D. Not have the engine running. Explanation. To test your air brakes for a leak, start with a fully charged system. Turn off the engine and release the parking brakes. Allow the system to settle and time it for 1 minute. The air pressure should not drop more than 2C in a single vehicle, 3C for a combination of 2 vehicles, and 5C for a combination of 3 or more vehicles. Question number 50. When the brakes are applied, brake shoes and linings are pushed against A. the brake lining, B. the brake pads, C. the inside of the brake chamber, D. the inside of the drum. The correct answer here, D. the inside of the drum. Explanation. In order to stop, the brakes must be applied. This causes the brake shoes and linings to be pushed against the inside of the drum, which creates friction. This friction slows the vehicle down. Question number 51. What can happen if the air pressure gets too low in an air brake system? A. The brakes may squeak. B. The brakes may be sluggish. C. The brakes will be very sensitive. D. The brakes may not work. The correct answer here, D. The brakes may not work. Explanation. Pressing and releasing the brake pedal unnecessarily can let air out faster than the compressor can replace it, reducing the available air pressure. If the air pressure in an air brake system gets too low, the brakes will no longer work.